Everyone. I have a hugely important guest with us today. His pseudonym is AJ Juice, and he has written many, many papers. He is probably one of the most courageous researchers, I would think, in terms of pushing the boundaries and rethinking everything in terms of Islamic origins. Um, AJ Juice, welcome to the channel.
Thank you for having me. Hello, Mel.
Well, we know each other pretty well over the last few years because we've been in frequent communication. Perhaps you want to introduce yourself maybe to the audience in whatever way you like.
I would like not to introduce myself. I would like to do that as we go along.
Okay.
I would like not credentials to speak, but what we actually talk about.
Yeah.
Okay. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is that we don't know it all.
Yes.
We just don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have to come from the premise that we don't know it all, that we make theses, that we try to figure out how this works, but we will still make mistakes. That's what we need to know. Right?
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I suppose a big topic of discussion over the last few years has been the issue of Muhammad. And in your opinion, what do you make of the Muslim argument that Muhammad is mentioned in Song of Songs 5:16?
Let me just quickly pull up a screen for you.
Okay, excellent.
So I take that from your presentation just quickly, right? In the messianic understanding of the Song of Song, we have the idea that Muhammad is mentioned, Prophet Muhammad is mentioned in the Song of Songs. And one could make that argument if one would not know the chain of Muhammads that we're actually looking at. It's not just in the Song of Songs. It's again and again and again in the different sources we see it. And probably the most important one of them is Talmud Berakoch, because there it spells it out. So you went through this thing, the messianic interpretation and the trope of the beloved as Messiah. You laid that out. That Israel would be the female lover, but among the multifarious interpretations that appear in classic rabbinic literature, there was a line of exegesis that saw the beloved hoped for Messiah. Okay, if that is true, then this is really profound because it changes the whole approach that we have. Because if Muhammad is basically predicted, or Prophet Muhammad were predicted in Song of Songs, what that would mean is that Prophet Muhammad is Jewish as number one.
Big problem.
Now, I'm not entirely sure whether Muslims would want to advocate that, but that's the logical consequence.
Yeah.
Right. So we have all these texts that talk about the beloved and the Muhammad in text that go through rabbis and keep on going, and we see through the centuries. Now, when you do this, you then see that texts have been changed, texts have been removed, texts have been reread and reinterpreted. So it's really confusing. So what we would need to do to understand what the Song of Songs wants to say is to put this progression into real world messianic events. But if you just look at this and follow this word and see it everywhere, it means nothing. But if you put this into the progression of world messianic events across the diaspora, then we have an entirely different picture that emerges. The picture is that these interpretations that we see reflect actual messianic events. And I come back to that, what that actually means. They are not unrelated intellectual exercises as one might think. The denial and the suppression and the changes and the editing out is a logical consequence of messianic failures, and I will explain what that means as we go along. Do you follow me so far?
Absolutely. I noticed that, hopefully I'm not anticipating anything you're going to say, but I noticed that very much in the 7th century with the Jewish writings about the expectation of the Messiah ben Joseph. And as events changed, they tweaked the writings literally year by year, practically,
Yes.
So absolutely, I could imagine that over a longer period that was even more the case. So yeah.
Yes. So looking at these things in isolation is useless, and that's what we've been doing for a long time. We focus in under something, look at it in isolation, and it just doesn't get us anywhere. So you look at the Dome of the Rock, for example. If you line up the evidence year after year after year after year, then you see how things change. Then you see how things are invented. And then you see all of a sudden when things actually happen. Now we know, even though there's people who deny the actual evidence, we know that we have 3 witnesses at the same time during the time of Benjamin Tudela that tell us precisely what was standing up there, tell us precisely what the inscriptions looked like, and yet there are still people who say, well, we've got the evidence and it's not really evidence. They might not have been able to read Arabic or whatever. There's excuses to argue away the actual evidence that is just, it just doesn't make any sense. Okay, so when we have these after the fact denials, all it does is frame the conversation. It basically gives us a bait where the conversation is going. If we are not fully understanding what's going on with this chain of Muhammads and this chain of messiahs and this chain of events, then somebody can frame the conversation and we're just powerless in pushing back and delivering the facts, the actual evidence. So, as for who I am, I'm an economist. I'm specialized on the economic history of religious organizations. That's how I read the Quran, the New Testament, and the Old Testament. And when I, as economist, read the Old Testament, it has 2 purposes. The redemption of the promised land is nothing other than building an empire and a banking monopoly. There is a reason why Islam and Christianity has usury laws or had usury laws, and Judaism doesn't. There's a reason why Judaism allows taking interest from Christians and Muslims, but not from Jews themselves. So we have to understand it in a bigger picture, as uncomfortable that is. It may sound anti-Semitic because it's a trope, right? So I'm not against Jews, I'm not against Christians, I'm not against Muslims, I'm not against anyone. Anyone can believe whatever they want. I'm for evidence, and evidence is guiding what we are trying to do. It's only through evidence that we can find what's going on. So when we have this empire and the so-called redemption, the end game is that the Messiah appears and everybody must submit to that Messiah. For Christians, it's pretty easy to understand. All you need to do is read Revelation. There's 144,000 survivors. Who are they? Levitic priests. I mean, it takes my breath away. As a former Christian, I was trained and schooled in a Franciscan convent. So I learned church history, Catholic church history from the ground up, and learned the Bible from the ground up. But I'm awestruck by the idea that the only survivors of what I'm praying for would not be Christians. they will be the Jewish leadership. That doesn't make any sense, but that's what the New Testament, what the Revelation says. So Muhammad confirms a chain of messiahs where we assume individuals under a title, but Muhammad does not confirm Prophet Muhammad or Jesus. It just confirms the chain, one link of which may be Muhammad as a name, with the title Muhammad and the name Muhammad, and one of which may be Jesus. But what Muhammad in Song of Songs and the whole list of Muhammads that we have does is it turns the entire Islamic enterprise into a Jewish-led enterprise. And we have to be clear, we'll come to the social structure of that, what that actually means, Jewish-led enterprise, because we have to understand that things were a little bit different back then than they are today. The design of this whole Muhammad conversation, of friendly conversation, is clever enough that Christians default to Jesus and Muslims default to Prophet Muhammad. The framing is designed that way. We just have to be careful not to fall over it, and we fall over it if we don't have enough evidence on how this actually works. So I have three motivational drivers of why I'm doing what I'm doing. Number one, history of economics and religious organizations. That's my bread. There's the Deus Te Salvet mystery. Basically means AG Deus saves you, but that has a background. And the question of anti-Semitism. Now, my background is royal Jewish. I have DNA that goes through Israel back to Afghanistan and the Middle East. A burning question for me was always, why anti-Semitism? If you look at the Bible, the first instance of Hebrews is that they're a hated people. It just doesn't make any sense why they would be a hated people, why they would be portrayed as a hated people, why they would be portrayed in the New Testament as a hated people so we can hate them, and why they're portrayed in the Quran as a hated people. So we will hopefully find out that if we understand anti-Semitism a little bit better, we will understand the beginnings of Islam much, much, much better.
Okay.
Just quickly, the Deus Te Salvet mystery. The architect in Pisa for three structures, that's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the San Nicolas Bell Tower, and the Baptistry, and the Campanile of the Duomo, is Dio Ti Salvi. Right, I just changed that into the Deus Te Salvet mystery. Now, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was built in 1113, is the recipient of the treasure of Jerusalem. As an economist, it doesn't get into my head why the treasure of Jerusalem arrives in Pisa and not in Rome. It just doesn't make any sense. So all my alarm bells are on. What is it that we're looking at here? So when you look at Pisa a little bit closer, we have, can you see my pointer? We have on top the big the big Camposanto. Then we have the Duomo, we have the Baptistry, and we have the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Very, very famous church.
Yeah.
One of the finds that come from there is the Pisa Griffin. And it alarms me. Why is there a Pisa Griffin? This is a Saracen statue, and we fail to understand how this fits together. And I just leave it there. Yeah. Okay. So in the 13th century, a shipload of sacred soil came from Golgotha to the Camposanto. Okay. And the treasure was there, exhibited, and the thing was burned down. So, of course, I have questions. So now I have a Pisa griffin. I have a treasure that doesn't make sense where it is, and I burn it all down. That tells me we're hiding something, right? So I want to know what's being hidden. Now I open that mystery a little bit more. The Nestorian stele shows us a Nestorian cross, which is also the symbol of Pisa. Now this symbol shows up everywhere in southern France, shows up in Narbonne, in Toulouse, etc. And I'm not there yet. I'm just trying to say where I'm coming from. There's a lot of work still ahead of me. The Pisa in the Nuremberg Chronicle, 1493, is depicted in color with all these buildings there. You see a lot of churches there with spires. But if you look a little bit closer, these spires carry Muslim symbols. Now one could say in 1493 they didn't know how to draw, but we have seen in the paper of the Dome of the Rock, in the Serpent King, that they very well knew how to draw, that they knew how to follow the details. Can you see that on your screen?
I can. My only issue is it could be interpreted as a Muslim symbol, but it might be, for all I know, it might be just a reference to the moon, and it may not necessarily carry the Islamic meaning for them.
Absolutely. I'm just telling you what I see.
Yeah.
I have no answers for any of this. I'm not there. Okay.
Yeah.
This is the leaning tower of Pisa. That's what it looked like on the left in 1372. But before 1372, for at least 60 years, it didn't have the bell tower on it. And there is evidence that Saracens were praying from minarets as Nestorians. And that's just as far as I go. That's just as far as I go. Cannot go any further. There's a lot of mosques that have been converted in Italy and Spain. Supposedly they have been torn down and replaced, but no, they have not been torn down and replaced. They're still standing. We cannot recognize them because the differences between these buildings are very small. They're very small. It's very difficult to distinguish those places.
I would think that if there were which you seem to be implying, a Muslim presence there, I would imagine that it possibly would show up in homilies from the time. I'm sure it would have created some sort of reaction. Yes.
The question is who the Saracens are there. The Saracens are definitely there. Benjamin of Tudela tells us about Pisa that there are 10,000 houses and only 6 Jews. All inhabitants are mighty men. They possess neither king nor prince to govern them, but only the judges appointed by themselves. So who are these people? Who are these people building these buildings who are nobody, basically, according to Tudela, but they're building this? So that's the beginning. That's the beginning of
where you started with all of this.
Of the questions that I had, in particular about the treasure landing in Pisa, not in Rome. That just didn't make any sense. That prompted me to go all the way back, first to the Reconquista, and then I'm not getting anywhere here. Then to Islam, not getting anywhere there. Then to Christianity, not getting anywhere there. To Judaism, not getting anywhere there. Before Judaism, and now all of a sudden, I see, okay, if I follow the priesthood, it took me a few years to get there. If I follow the priesthood instead of the people, maybe I get somewhere. So when you follow the priesthood, then things start to look a little bit different. Now, the anti-Semitism. When we look at the Holocaust, horrible, 6 million Jews were killed. We see the effects, and we have a lot of books about the causes, but the causes seem to be all focused on the right there and then. It doesn't look across the timeline because it's a pattern. It's not the first time that Jews were persecuted. So what's the pattern? And if you're starting to try to figure that out, you see that you don't actually find anything about that, except for in literature that is stamped off as anti-Semitic. And you will see in a little bit that even Jewish sources are stamped off as anti-Semitic when they're critical of their own, of what they're doing. So that refocus on the priesthood and the leadership promises to get us into a different place of understanding what's going on. Now, what I'm saying here is that the big conflict inside Judaism is between Samaritans and rabbinic Jews. They hate each other, right? And we don't really understand why that is. We have all these answers why this is. But when we start to dig deeper and again go with this anti-Semitism all the way to the beginning, where the Hebrews come up first as hated people, if you go to the beginning and line it up on the timeline across regions, internationally basically, then the picture that emerges is an entirely different one. Picture is this. The center of religious conflict has been between the Levant and the Mesopotamian Jewish Holy Land forever. We can read it in the Bible, we can read it in extra biblical sources, how the conflict is going on. It just so happens that the main demarcation line between Samaritans and rabbinic Jews is the Levant with Egypt and Persia, basically. It's just rough. They're overlapping, but that's the rough outline that we need to understand. If we understand that, then we see all of a sudden how the patterns work together. Here's a text from Benjamin of Tudela. Benjamin of Tudela has a couple of nuggets in there that are just beyond. He tells us precisely where the pilgrimage went, for example. He tells us that the pilgrims didn't go to Mecca, but they actually went to Baghdad, that they went to worship the caliph there, who was Muhammad, basically. So he gives us a lot of information that people seem to be dismissing because it doesn't fit into the narrative. But once you have the narrative of a Jewish-led operation, then the fog starts to dawn. Thence it is 2 parasangs to Nablus, which is Shechem on Mount Ephraim, where there are no Jews. The place is situated in the valley between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, and contains about 1,000 Kuthim who observe the written law of Moses alone and are called Samaritans. They have priests of the seed of Aaron, and they call them Aaronim, who do not intermarry with Kuthim, but wed only amongst themselves. These priests offer sacrifices and bring burnt offerings in their place of assembly on Mount Gerizim, as it is written in their law, and thou shalt set the blessing on Mount Gerizim. What do you think of that?
Well, there's nothing jumping out at me as hugely significant at the minute. I'm analyzing it. I'm obviously focusing in on the word Aaron there.
Okay,
so,
you're of course, but as soon as I tell you that the Jews who hate the Samaritans and the Samaritans who hate the Jews share the priesthood.
Yeah.
They have a Levitic layer of priesthood that allows them to coordinate whatever they do.
So you're saying that they don't see themselves as completely distinct from each other because of that priesthood connection. That's the binder.
they're not distinct from each other. The
Right.
people are distinct from each other.
Yeah.
And that's where we get confused. That's why we have to distinguish the leadership from the people. We, the people, you, Mel, all your listeners, whether they're Catholic or Muslims or Jews, we don't matter. We don't matter in this play. What matters is the priesthood, the leadership, and the royal level. That's what matters. Now, once you have that, now of course your alarms are up, your senses are up, right? So in Trullo, for example, which is the church synod near Constantinople, Armenia was forced to abandon its hereditary priesthood. See, that goes together with what Tudela says, because the hereditary priesthood can be nothing other than the Levite priesthood. Because if you go back to Revelation, that's how it is designed. That's how it ought to be. So if we have a non-Jewish priesthood, we are actually in violation of Revelation. We're actually in violation of the biblical idea of what the post-apocalyptic world is supposed to look like. That leads me to just quickly touch at the social hierarchy. When you look at these times, I guess a lot of us look at these times and their standard of looking at it is how we live today. But life back then was completely different. Number one, education was concentrated at the very top of that pyramid, which I have on the left bottom there. There's the royals, there's the priests, and there's the aristocrats, and that's where the education basically ends. That doesn't mean everybody else is dumb. They probably can count money. They probably can speak. They probably can exchange ideas. But to organize yourself, you need the written word. You need to be able to do that. And when we look at this hierarchy, we need again look at it globally. There's one group and one group only that is globally organized. That is the Jewish diaspora. I come back to that, what the power is of that diaspora. If they are the educated people and the rest of the people, like the Christians, are not very well educated, it has huge consequences of who is going to be the bosses. Okay, you follow me so far?
Yeah.
So I don't want to offend any Christian or any Muslim or any Jew about Jesus Christ and its standing. Again, I need to follow the facts. Here on the screen is basically all the combinations that you can have, how God relates to Jesus or his son and the Spirit. So how do you do that? Now, you probably agree that there's not many people who can give you all combinations and explain to you what each of them exactly is. You agree with me?
Is that okay? Well, I think most educated Christians would be able to give you a good synopsis, or they should do anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. No. If you start to try, you're going to be in trouble because there's many different possibilities how this is going together. And what I'm trying to say is, so here we have the educated upper class and the not so educated underclass, and you're telling me that they're willing to die for these differences that in essence are meaningless for a spiritual life, right? And I say meaningless only because, not as an offense, but because it doesn't actually matter how you position it, as long as you live the life according to the principles that the teaching gives you.
Okay, so what I'm understanding is that really, if we take the 7th century, for example, and all the theological arguments, these were arguments among the upper echelon. It wasn't
absolutely correct.
That's where you're going with this, yeah.
Absolutely
Gotcha.
correct. The people just have to carry the weapons, and we can see that they did carry the weapons because we can measure the rivers in blood, right? We know exactly when they killed each other over which questions, and it's incredible because none of us would want to die for these questions. It makes no sense because it's just hypothetical, right? Below this question lurks the same question of Miriam. Okay. Tell me, Mel, how does Miriam, no, not Miriam, sorry, how does Mary relate to you with the temple?
Well, okay. Well, my understanding is that Mary, now, there are different Christians who have different takings on this. So I'll be looking at the Catholic take. So maybe the Orthodox take would be similar, but in any case, Mary would be viewed as the new Ark of the Covenant. She carries the word. So therefore, the temple would be a symbolic way of representing Mary in essence as well. There's kind of an interconnection between Mary and the temple because of that. And then you have the famous story, the presentation in the temple. She's very much connected with the temple. So there's also the stopping the place of rest near Jerusalem, where Mary is said to have rested, and there's the story of the palm trees bending over. It occurs in the Quran. So it's another motif connected with Mary and the temple.
Okay. Okay. But you probably would have difficulty to show biblical evidence for this connection with Mary, as you're saying it, right? It would come in later writers that would basically tell us that Mary would have the position. We don't really know much about Mary from the New Testament.
Not so much. I'm kind of I'm going blind, as in the sense of I'm not sure exactly where you're going with all of this, but I'll just wait to see what you've got to say on it.
Okay. Where I'm going is trying to make us understand why Miriam is so important, why they call Mary Miriam and not Mary. Why Miriam is the sister of Aaron, why that is important. And what you're telling me is actually in the Quran, because the Quran actually creates that connection with Mary to the temple. Okay. So if you look at Quran 3:11, there we have Armageddon already behind it. Yeah, I've already had a sign in the meeting of the two hosts. So that's clear. Every Christian understands that the meeting of the two hosts is after Armageddon. It happened. Now we're done. In 3:28, the day of judgment has come. On that day shall every soul find present to it. Every Christian knows what that is, right? I don't have to explain it. While the battle of the hosts at Armageddon is in the past, the day of judgment is imminent. What comes after that day of judgment is that that the temple descends from heaven in the New Jerusalem. And if you go back to Isaiah, that's pretty clear what's happening. So just a single verse down, Imran and the birth of Miriam come to the temple under the priest Zechariah's guardianship. Zacharias was a priest in Jerusalem and Miriam's guardian. So oft as Zacharias went into Mary at the sanctuary in the temple, he found her supplied with food. "O Mary," said he, "whence hast thou this?" She said, "It is from God, for God supplieth whom he will without reckoning." Miriam's typology is hugely important because Jews cannot accept Jesus without it. You have to mark that in your mind. Without Miriam, nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
Miriam is the temple, the representation of the temple in Jerusalem with the covenant. So now Muslims and Christians actually agree, and they agree for a very simple reason, because that's how Jews come along.
I'm just conscious of the fact that after what you just said, considering that many Protestants disregard Mary or Miriam from their theology, that their theology then in effect would be unpersuasive for Jews because they're ignoring a key component.
Correct. And I'm going to dig a little bit deeper because she's so essential. Without her, we cannot understand the lineages, and we cannot understand what Jews are doing, and we cannot understand how proto-Islam is forming. If we start to understand, and I'm not saying I fully understand Miriam, I'm saying if we don't understand Miriam, we have a large mountain to climb.
Okay.
Miriam is perfect, even in tradition. Allah's apostle said, many amongst men attained perfection, but amongst women none attained to perfection except Mary, the daughter of Imran, and Asiya, the wife of Pharaoh. And the superiority of Aisha to other women is like the superiority of Tarid to other meals. Now, here the economist in me goes like, what is it with these pharaohs? Why is this connection to royalty already? I mean, there is Jewish royalty, we understand that, but this connection to Egyptian royalty doesn't make any sense, does it? Like if we just absorb this a little bit, we are dealing with an entirely different narrative than just a Jewish minority that wants to be redeemed, basically. So it was Bat Paro for the Jews, the daughter of the Pharaoh, who fished Moses out of the Nile, and she is the one who recognized the divine presence in Moses. Miriam did the same, right? But if you do that, you're like, okay, there's the daughter of Pharaoh who recognizes the divine presence in Moses. What does she do then if she recognizes the divine presence in Moses? Well, she must accept Moses as the divine presence. That puts Moses into a spiritual leadership role over that daughter of the Pharaoh, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Miriam is the mother of believers. The prophet said, the best of the world's women is Mary at her lifetime, and the best of the world's women is Khadijah at her lifetime. It's from Bukhari. Okay, well, what does Khadijah have to do with any of this? So 4 important women are the ladies of heaven. I guess you smell where we're going. We're talking about polytheism and goddesses and things like that. So where we're touching on the Theotokos, actually, right? So we have 4 important women, ladies of heaven, Muhammad's wives, Khadijah, Fatima, Asiya, and Miriam. They constitute the mother of believers. So Khadijah, the mother of mothers, which is Muhammad's wife, was not only a merchant as big as all other merchants combined, which is, of course, a tale, she was also a virgin. You have the element of the virgin. Where do you think that is coming from? If you just compare her with the New Testament, you got it right there.
Yeah.
When she hired the soon-to-be prophet Muhammad for her business empire, her ritual purity is attested in her epithet, Amirat Quraysh al-Tahira, the pure princess of Quraysh. Bukhari submits that Khadijah believed in the Islamic Allah and was knowledgeable in Quranic prescriptions before Muhammad even knew that he was supposed to be a prophet. So let that sink in for a second, right? So these women are hugely important. They're not just there for storytelling. They're hugely important because their lineage matters. But we also see here, there's no paganism anywhere near here. This is Judaism, plain and simple. There's no shaking this. Fatima, Maria's daughter. She was betrothed to Ali, from whom Hassan Hussein's descend. I guess they're kind of mythical figures, Hassan and Hussein. I don't think there's any evidence that they even existed. It kind of looks nice, but there's real people instead. Her title, Al-Siddiqa, is the righteous, renders her Sadducean Jewess, and thus also her mother. She carries the epithet Al-Sara, meaning the radiant, and perhaps Sarah, another Miriam, alluding to her extraordinary holiness, which is also reinforced with another title of hers, Abiha, meaning the mother of her father. It seems to be a sidekick to the Christian Theotokos, the mother of God in Christianity. Fatima carries yet another epithet, Mariam al-Kubra, meaning the greater Mary, daughter of Imran, another Miriam. She is not the mother of her father, but rather the mother of the fathers, the lineage of the Imams. Shias relate her name to Fatir, which means the creator. So does that open a world for you, what I'm saying here?
Yeah. So far, I'm seeing it as a repurposing of Christian motifs. That's how I would view it, which in turn were a repurposing of Jewish motifs.
All right. All right. Good.
But I think where you're going is that this is important because it's an indicator of lineage and who has the power based on lineage, right?
That's right. Yeah. So let's look at Ali's mother, another Fatima. The originally pagan, quote, Ali was also born from a Fatima, another creator goddess who raised the orphaned future prophet Muhammad. Orphaned means that the temple was not operational. It's a very important word, orphan, that we don't read this wrong. There's an orphan that is a real orphan, and then is an orphan who is the one without a temple. She was his guardian, just like Zechariah, with the Quran's Miriam. Going into labor, she went to the Kaaba to pray. A wall of the Kaaba broke open, prompting Fatima to give birth inside the holy pagan temple. You know where I'm going, right?
Yeah.
After 3 days, she emerged with Ali, whom she named Haidar, lion. You know where that is going, right? The symbol of a lion born in the Holy of Holies is a Messiah from the house of David. In this case, an Alid Mahdi. This can only either be a Jewish Gaon, a Jewish Nasi, or a Jewish exilarch prince. Ali's mother, the creator goddess Fatima, was born of Asad ibn Hashim, Hasmonean. Hashim means Hasmonean, and the Davidic line at that. Asad also means line. Her mother was Fatima bint Qais, another Miriam in the chain of the Jewish Miriams. One of this Fatima's daughters was Adai bint Asad bin Hashim, herself mother of the Jewish exilarch Haninai al-Nehar Pekot ben Busenai bar Adai. The Jewish exilarch Haninai was the Gaon of Surah, and here we have it coming together. Okay?
Gotcha. Yeah.
You understand? We're not talking about repurposing Christian doctrine. We're talking repurposing things in a way that it fits the Jewish mindsets. Repurposes it, repositions Christian doctrines to fit in the Jewish mindsets.
Gotcha. Yeah.
That makes her, as Adoa, the wife of the Jewish exilarch Bostenai and progenitor of the branch of the Bostenai family tree. All Davidic messiahs must come through the temple mother. The Muslim leaders were literally in bed with the Jewish exilarchy. They were not just intimately familiar with each other, but they were intimate with each other. And we have to understand that we are looking at an entirely different picture